Hi, I'm Austin Campbell, and I've been in the blockchain space for quite a while now. I helped build one of the early Bitcoin custodians. I've run the third largest stablecoin in the world. I've helped manage a gold token. I've been the co-head of digital assets at one of the largest banks. I now teach a blockchain course at NYU. But today I'm here with one of my friends, Anna. Anna, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Yuan. I am the founder of a company called Perena. We make stablecoins more productive by helping people invest in structured products using stablecoins. I've spent a lot of time talking to Austin about stablecoins, real-world assets, and tokenization. So I look forward to the next few hours where I will be tortured by Austin on all sorts of questions regarding tokenization.
No worse than what I do to my students.
What's a blockchain?
Blockchains are ledgers. They're a list to record who owns what. So Anna, electronic ledgers are actually a relatively recent invention in the history of finance. In fact, in the United States, up until the paperwork crisis, we were trading everything with paper tickets. But in a much shorter period of time, we've already gone from solely having centralized electronic ledgers to blockchains.
Historically, there are two types of ledgers. There's the public ledger and a private ledger. Public ledgers are visible to anybody querying the database. Private ledgers are generally only visible to permissioned or authorized access.
Why are we using a blockchain instead of just a regular centralized ledger? And so what I want to get your answer to, because I know what my view is, and we can argue about this one, why would you use a blockchain over just having like JP Morgan run a ledger?
Why use blockchain?
Because blockchains are redundant. There are thousands of verifiable true copies of the same set of data. For example, if the city hall in the past burned down, people wouldn't know who owns which property. However, if those deeds were recognized on the blockchain, even if the main copy is lost, there would still be thousands of backup copies that people can reach agreement on. Because blockchains are transparent and verifiable, a single actor cannot unilaterally change records. In many instances, you don't, but I have seen, and I think there's a huge space for imagination and innovation. I know your answer.
Blockchains offer three main improvements compared to traditional systems, where records can be wrong, records can be lost, or records can be modified or tampered with. On a blockchain, it's nearly impossible to do any of those things.
But I'm going to add some more. So for one, when assets exist across many different ledgers, there's every country, every type of asset would exist across every jurisdiction, maybe even down to like every province or state would have asset repositories of different kinds. So now when you're trying to exchange, buy and sell one type of asset for another asset, especially cross-border or cross-asset type, it becomes extremely inefficient. For example, it is simply unimaginable to sell your house, use that money to buy into like a private fund all within one day because the asset's title and ownership transfer takes way too long. Blockchain is an easy way to write and edit in a way that everybody can agree upon near instantly. So then you can, Web3, we call it composability. So you can compose different assets in a much faster way than traditional ledgers.
And part of that is that they function as an omni-ledger, if you will. Because if you look at the traditional system, we have things like DTCC in the United States, which is where all the securities are recorded. But your bank is going to have a ledger, which is where they're recording deposits, and housing titles are yet on a third ledger. And by the way, certain kinds of commodities at the CME are now on a fourth ledger. And you're going down this list of like fragmentation upon fragmentation upon fragmentation upon fragmentation. And that exists sometimes for good reasons around efficiency or preferences of how to run it. But a lot of times for bad reasons, which is just, this is kind of how we did it. We didn't think about the whole system. So what I'm hearing from you is one of the advantages of blockchains is by being an omni-ledger and getting everything in one place that people can trust, we can actually now move everything both together and against each other.
Correct. And historically, there were also good reason to have each other have their own plot of land or own ledger is because you don't want one part, you don't want SEC, CFTC, or whoever, or you don't want like DTCC to be recording every asset on Earth. That would be bad. But blockchain allows different stakeholders to write to it. And the verifiability, the redundancy that we talked about is what powers this type of mass consensus or mass coordination.
Yeah, I have a friend from the Federal Reserve who's probably thought more about financial structures than most people in the world. And he once hit me with the analogy of, I explained to people when you should use a blockchain is the difference between needing to go somewhere in a tank or a Honda Civic. The Honda Civic is fast, it's efficient, it's easy to use. But if somebody's going to shoot a rocket at you, you're going to have a very hard time in the Honda Civic. The tank is for environments where you don't trust the people that you're going to encounter, where you need that level of institutionalized durability to survive. And so one of the interesting things to me about blockchains becoming the omni ledger is if you look at all of those fragmented systems, often the people running them wouldn't trust other people running other systems, or wouldn't see that the incentives were aligned between all of those groups. And that's not a thing you have to worry about as much with a blockchain, right?
Exactly. So that's why I think after much experimentation, we as an industry settled on blockchain's best use case is finance. And in many scenarios, whether it's confirming whether transactions have gone through, structuring complex financial transactions with different logic or conditions, coordinating with multiple parties, like one pay many, so one to many payments, many to one transactions or recurring transactions. Those are all things that happen in traditional finance, but they were bolted on to the legacy rail such that it works. Maybe like a sweep account is an example where structurally a sweep is really annoying to put together, but on a blockchain you can do that quite easily.
It becomes almost automatic.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other forms, as I've looked at failures in the traditional financial system. So let's be specific to the United States for a moment. One of the problems that we've had repeatedly is the inability to settle transactions instantly. Yeah. If you were on a trading desk in 2008 and you get a phone call and somebody says, I want to sell you $100 million of treasuries, it's Friday afternoon, you will feel very differently if the people calling you are literally the Federal Reserve versus Lehman Brothers, yeah, because you're waiting until at least Monday to settle that transaction. Whereas if you could settle it right now or the trade breaks, you might care much less about that problem. And instant settlement is one of many examples of things that blockchains have improved upon. But I do want to push back on something you were saying, though, which is, are we not still early with blockchains? And what I mean by that is the first blockchain that was run publicly, Bitcoin, was created in 2009. Yeah. And we're sitting here having this discussion in 2026, which means these have been around for 17-ish years. And I will remind everybody the internet was created in, call it the late 1970s, early 1980s. I guess it depends when you define ARPANET and where things come out of. But suffice to say, we are at best in the mid-90s. And I don't think anybody in 1994 was like, aha, TikTok, right? So part of what I would ask you is, do we really know what they're going to be used for? Will it just be finance?
We don't. I think there's a ton of space to iterate. Past failed experiments doesn't mean that the same thing wouldn't be tried and wouldn't succeed again in the future. I do think, though, the difference, and social media is a great analogy, the difference between blockchain and pure internet is a lot of blockchain adoption is a social coordination and social consensus problem. So just like the two-sided or the social network flywheel, MySpace or AOL, Skype existed, but they never formed into this like social flywheel. I also want to push back on one point, though, that you said. When electronic trading started, that completely took over or completely revolutionized the way people traded within 15 years, 20 years. But blockchain's adoption is much slower. So a lot of critics argue that it's not necessarily better because, for example, intraday marginal calls and delayed settlement are now to be known as oftentimes a feature, not a bug, for market structure stability. But blockchain with instant settlement changes that. Therefore, it's more likely to see extreme movements because the market, by nature, markets are quite brittle, as it is the manifestation of humans coordinating and trying to communicate with each other via trades. What do you think about that?
So one of the things I've said a couple of times is you can run a fast system slowly, but you can't run a slow system fast.
True. Yeah.
And so one of the things is just because you have the capability does not mean you always need to use it. There's no reason we can't do net settlement on a blockchain. We just haven't built it yet. That is certainly a thing that could be done. It's not even that complex if people wanted it. So one of the things I would point at is you want to build systems that are robust to a crisis. Part of why electronic trading took off quickly is it had clear and tangible benefits and the regulators didn't oppose it. In fact, they encouraged it. Whereas with blockchains, the benefits will be most apparent when things go wrong and the regulators have actively opposed it. So for example, people talked about robust derivatives clearinghouses for 20 plus years and nobody did anything until 2008. So this may be one of those cases where you're going to learn the hard way about adoption.